I never thought that I would write about how I watch porn live with my wife, that I always thought my life was stable, boring, even in the best way possible. My wife, Rachel, and I had been married for 8 years. We had our little routines: morning coffee in the kitchen, family dinners with our 2-year-old daughter, movie nights every Friday. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and I trusted her implicitly. Until I didn't. It started small, like a faint ripple across the surface of what I thought was a calm lake. Rachel began dressing up more than usual. Fancy dresses for lunches with the girls, makeup done like she was meeting royalty. She'd laugh it off when I teased her, saying, "A girl needs to feel good about herself." And I bought it. I mean, why wouldn't I? But then came the excuses. Late meetings, canceled plans, and her sudden attachment to her phone, always texting someone with a sly smile. The tipping point came when I noticed something odd while reviewing footage from the security cameras I'd installed at home a few months prior. Rachel always hated the cameras, by the way, saying they made the house feel like a prison. I joked that they were for catching raccoons, but really, I'd installed them for peace of mind. One lazy Saturday morning, while Rachel was out shopping, I opened the camera app, mainly out of boredom. What I saw turned my stomach. There she was, Rachel on camera, in our bedroom, our sacred space. She wasn't alone. Standing there, clear as day, was Marcus, my business partner, the guy I'd built my company with from scratch. They were laughing, kissing, moving in ways that shattered any illusion of innocence. In our bed, for a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. My vision tunneled, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. I felt like I'd been stabbed in the back, but the knife had twisted on the way out. It wasn't just betrayal. It was betrayal in my home, under my roof. But instead of confronting her right away, I did something unexpected. I hit record. I saved the footage, and I started to plan. For the rest of that Saturday, I walked around in a haze, pretending everything was fine. I played with my daughter, made her lunch, and even joked with Rachel when she got home, her arms filled with shopping bags. She kissed me on the cheek and asked if I could help her bring in the rest of the groceries. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. Or scream. I wasn't sure which. But I played my part perfectly. I acted like the clueless husband, smiling and nodding through her stories about boutique sales and overpriced lattes. All the while, I replayed that footage in my head on an endless loop, my rage simmering just beneath the surface. I had to stay calm. I had to stay in control. If I exploded now, I'd lose the upper hand. That night, I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone while Rachel was in the kitchen, texting someone, probably Marcus. I'd memorized the way her face lit up when she texted him, how she'd bite her lip like a teenager with a crush. It made me sick. Still, I said nothing. Instead, I started researching. I pulled up a list of private investigators, wondering if I needed more evidence. Then I remembered the cameras. I had everything I needed: timestamps, footage, proof. The wheels in my head turned as I considered my next steps. Divorce? Sure, but not yet. Revenge? Absolutely. But it had to be surgical, precise, devastating. The next morning, I woke up early and told Rachel I was heading to the office to work on a new client proposal. She barely looked up from her phone to acknowledge me, muttering something about making plans with her friends later. I didn't bother to ask who. I already knew. Instead of going to the office, I drove to a hardware store across town. I bought a new camera, one that Rachel wouldn't know about. I also picked up a burner phone and a few other items that would come in handy for what I was planning. On my way home, I stopped at a coffee shop and sat in the corner, sipping my drink as I pieced everything together in my head. By the time I got back, Rachel was already gone, leaving a note on the counter. "Out with the girls, don't wait up." I almost laughed. She was probably with Marcus, laughing about how clueless I was. I installed the new camera in our bedroom, hidden in plain sight, blending in with the decor. It was better than the old one, smaller, clearer, and more discreet. If they decided to get bold again, I'd catch every detail. That evening, Rachel came home late, reeking of cheap perfume and too much wine. She stumbled into bed and passed out without saying a word. I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. She had no idea the trap was already being set. And then came the twist I hadn't seen coming. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. It wasn't a text or an email. It was the new camera's motion alert. Someone was in our bedroom, but it wasn't Rachel. It was Marcus. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The notification from the camera app buzzed again, more insistent this time. My heart pounded as I grabbed my phone and opened the live feed. There he was, Marcus, standing in the middle of my bedroom like he owned the place. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Rachel was still asleep next to me, her breathing deep and steady. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Marcus had a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and he was moving with the confidence of someone who'd been here before. He wasn't sneaking in. He was strolling through as if it were his second home. I watched frozen as he placed the bag on the bed and unzipped it. My blood ran cold when I saw him pull out a laptop and what looked like stacks of paperwork. What the hell was he doing? This wasn't just a fling. Whatever this was, it was bigger than I'd imagined. I debated my next move. Do I confront him now? Call the cops? Wake Rachel up and force her to see her lover standing in our room like a thief in the night? But something told me to wait. I needed to see what he was up to. Marcus settled onto the edge of the bed, his back to the camera, and started typing furiously on his laptop. I couldn't make out what he was working on, but every once in a while, he'd glance at the papers he'd brought and jot something down. I switched to the audio feed, holding my breath as I tried to pick up any clues. "Idiot won't know until it's too late," Marcus muttered under his breath, his tone dripping with arrogance. "By the time the dust settles, Rachel and I will have everything. This'll all look like his fault." The rage that boiled up inside me was indescribable. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning something much worse. My mind raced as I tried to piece it together. Was it about my business? My assets? Were they planning to strip me of everything I'd worked for? I sat there, gripping my phone so tightly I thought it might crack, watching as Marcus continued his work. Then, as casually as he'd entered, he packed up his things, zipped the duffel bag shut, and left the room. The front door clicked shut behind him, and the house fell silent again. Rachel hadn't stirred once. I knew I had to act fast. Marcus was bold, but arrogance makes people sloppy. He had no idea I'd seen everything. I opened the footage app and saved the entire interaction, time-stamped and crystal clear. Then I emailed it to my burner phone along with the audio file. If Marcus thought he was going to waltz into my life and take everything, he was about to learn a very painful lesson. The next morning, I didn't bother mentioning anything to Rachel. She acted normal, maybe a little too normal. She even made breakfast and kissed me on the cheek before heading out to yoga. I played along, wishing her a good workout, knowing full well she wasn't going anywhere near a gym. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed the duffel bag I'd hidden in the trunk of my car and headed to my office. Inside were files of my own, contracts, bank statements, and emails I'd gathered over the past few years. It was time to dig deeper into Marcus's role in my business. If he was stupid enough to conspire against me, I'd make sure he regretted it. By lunchtime, I'd uncovered the first bombshell. Marcus wasn't just Rachel's lover. He'd been siphoning money from our company for months, funneling it into a dummy account under Rachel's maiden name. Every dollar stolen felt like another knife to the back. But the best part? I had proof, and they had no idea that I sat in my office, staring at the mountain of evidence I'd gathered. On one hand, I felt like my world was crumbling. On the other, I had never been more focused. Marcus and Rachel thought they were untouchable, but they didn't know who they were messing with. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to destroy everything they'd built behind my back. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, Tom, a no-nonsense guy who handled my business contracts. Tom and I had worked together for years, and if there was anyone who could help me pull off what I was planning, it was him. "Tom, I need to meet with you ASAP. And don't ask any questions until we're face-to-face," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sounds serious," he replied, his tone shifting. "Come by in an hour." With that settled, I spent the next hour combing through every transaction Marcus had authorized on behalf of the company. He was sloppy, thinking I'd never look twice at the expenses he filed. I found payments for luxury hotel stays, jewelry, even some suspicious consulting fees that were transferred directly to Rachel's private account. When I showed up at Tom's office, I laid it all out for him. The affair, the stolen money, the incriminating footage. Tom leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from disbelief to outright anger. "You've got a rock-solid case here," he said, flipping through the paperwork. "But if you really want to nail these two, we need to play it smart. You can't just confront them with this. We need to build a legal wall so high they can't climb out of it." "That's exactly what I was thinking," I replied. Tom suggested freezing the company's accounts immediately, preventing Marcus from accessing any more funds. We also drafted a motion to have Marcus investigated for embezzlement. By the time I left his office, the wheels were already in motion. But that wasn't enough for me. No, I needed to make them feel the betrayal, the humiliation, the sheer pain they'd inflicted on me. So I set the second part of my plan into action. That night, I waited for Rachel to fall asleep before sneaking into her phone again. She had grown careless, assuming I was none the wiser. It didn't take long to find her text exchange with Marcus. "Rachel, are you sure he hasn't noticed anything? He's been acting weird." "Marcus, trust me, he's clueless. Just stick to the plan. By next month, we'll be out of here, and he'll be left cleaning up the mess." The arrogance was almost funny. They had no idea how close they were to stepping off a cliff. The next day, I went to my office early and called Marcus, pretending everything was fine. "Hey man," I said, forcing a friendly tone. "I was thinking we could grab lunch tomorrow and talk about the quarterlies." He hesitated for a moment. "Yeah, sure. Noon okay?" "Perfect," I replied, already planning how that lunch was going to go down. At noon, we met at a trendy cafe near the office. Marcus strutted in like he owned the place, flashing me his trademark grin. If he felt any guilt about stabbing me in the back, he didn't show it. "So, what's on your mind?" he asked, sitting down across from me. I smiled, keeping the conversation light, pretending to be oblivious. I let him talk about business, crack a few jokes, even complain about his workload. The whole time, I nodded along, as if I wasn't dying to reach across the table and strangle him. But then, I dropped the first bombshell. "Hey, I've been meaning to ask you something," I said casually, leaning back in my chair. "How's Rachel doing? You guys seem close." Marcus froze, the color draining from his face. For a second, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, trying to play dumb. I smiled wider, pulling out my phone. "Oh, nothing. Just wondering how it feels to sneak around in someone else's house." "You know my house." I hit play on the footage I'd saved, the sound of Marcus's voice filling the space between us. "By the time the dust settles, Rachel and I will have everything. This'll all look like his fault." His eyes widened as he realized what he was hearing. "Where the hell did you get that?" he asked, his voice low and panicked. I leaned in, lowering my voice to match his. "Let's just say you're not as smart as you think you are. And trust me, Marcus, this is only the beginning." Marcus stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. He was trying to come up with something, anything that would get him out of this. But there was no escape, and he knew it. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. "Oh, I don't want anything yet," I said. "But here's the deal. You're going to stop whatever little scheme you and Rachel cooked up, and you're going to do it quietly. Otherwise," I trailed off, tapping my phone screen. "This video goes straight to the board, to your wife, to anyone who'll listen." His face twisted into something between anger and fear. "You think you can blackmail me?" I smirked. "I don't think, Marcus." "I know." Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Look, let's not make this a big deal, okay? Rachel and it wasn't supposed to go this far." "Oh, I'm sure it wasn't," I said, keeping my tone mockingly casual. "Just a little fun, right? And stealing from the company? Let me guess. That was an accident too?" He looked like he wanted to punch me, but he held back. "Fine," he hissed. "I'll back off. Just don't make this public." I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. "You'll back off, huh? And what about Rachel? You think she's just going to roll over when I tell her this is done?" "Leave her out of this," he snapped. I laughed, loud enough to make the people at the next table glance our way. "Oh, Marcus, that's rich coming from you. But don't worry, I'll handle Rachel in my own time." Marcus glared at me, but he knew he was trapped. "What's your plan then?" I stood up, throwing a few bills on the table to cover the check. You'll find out soon enough. That night, I set phase 2 of my plan into motion. First, I sent the footage to my lawyer, Tom, along with the financial documents tying Marcus to the embezzlement. Make sure this is airtight, I told him. I don't want him wriggling out of this. Don't worry, Tom replied. By the time we're done, he won't just lose his job. He'll lose everything. Next, I turned my attention to Rachel. I needed her to think everything was still under control, at least for now. So I played the part of the loving, oblivious husband, even making her favorite dinner that night. She was in a great mood, laughing and joking like she didn't have a care in the world. It made my blood boil, but I kept my cool. I needed her comfortable, off guard. Later that night, while she was in the shower, I set up the final piece of the puzzle. I synced the new footage from the hidden camera to a cloud account, ensuring I had access to it no matter what happened. Then I made a folder labeled Divorce, Evidence, and sent myself a copy of everything. By the time Rachel came to bed, I was already under the covers, pretending to scroll through social media. She kissed me on the cheek and whispered, "Good night, babe." I stared at the ceiling long after she fell asleep, thinking about how much I'd loved her, how much I'd trusted her. That love was gone now, replaced by something cold and calculating. She wasn't my partner anymore. She was my enemy. And enemies get what they deserve. The next morning, I got a call from Tom. "It's done," he said. "The paperwork's filed, and the board's been notified about Marcus. They'll have no choice but to terminate him once they see this." I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Marcus had no idea what was coming. By the end of the week, he'd be jobless, disgraced, and under investigation for fraud. As for Rachel, her time was coming too, but not yet. The first domino fell faster than I expected. By Friday, Marcus's world was crumbling, and I had a front row seat. That morning, I got a call from one of the board members at our company. "Did you hear about Marcus?" she asked, her voice laced with shock and a little too much glee. "They're suspending him pending an internal investigation. Something about financial discrepancies." I forced my voice to stay neutral. "Really? I hadn't heard. That's unexpected." She chuckled. "Well, I can't say I'm surprised. He always acted like he was untouchable. I guess karma caught up with him." I hung up, grinning like a maniac. The trap was springing shut, and Marcus had no idea I was the one who set it. By lunchtime, word had spread throughout the office. Marcus was officially on leave, pending a full audit of his financial activities. The smug look he always wore was nowhere to be seen as he packed up his desk under the watchful eyes of HR. I made sure to cross paths with him on his way out. "Tough day out?" I said, feigning sympathy. He glared at me, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Oh, Marcus," I replied, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "This is just the beginning." He stormed past me, his face red with fury, and I couldn't help but smile. When I got home that evening, Rachel was already there, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine. "Hey, babe," she said, smiling like nothing was wrong. "Hey," I replied, hanging up my jacket. "You hear about Marcus?" Her smile faltered for just a second, so quick that most people wouldn't have noticed. But I wasn't most people, not anymore. "Marcus?" she asked, her voice carefully casual. "What about him?" "He's been suspended," I said, watching her reaction closely. "Some sort of financial investigation. Pretty serious, from what I hear." Her grip on the wine glass tightened ever so slightly. "Wow, that's surprising," she said, looking away. I nodded, pretending to drop the subject. But inside, I was seething. She was already trying to calculate her next move. That night, Rachel's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she was upstairs. The screen lit up with a notification. "Marcus, we need to talk. Now." I picked up her phone, tempted to read the message. But no, this was better. I unlocked the phone and forwarded Marcus's message to my burner phone before setting hers back exactly where it was. Rachel came downstairs a few minutes later, her face slightly flushed. She glanced at her phone, saw the message, and hesitated. "I'm going to bed early," she said, avoiding my eyes. "All right," I replied, barely looking up from my laptop. As soon as she was out of sight, I opened the message on my burner phone and replied as her. "Not now. He's getting suspicious. Let's wait until the weekend." I smiled to myself, imagining the look on Marcus's face as he read that. Let him stew in his own paranoia for a while. The next day, I decided it was time to take things up a notch. While Rachel was out running errands, I logged into the cloud account where I'd stored the footage of her and Marcus. I selected a particularly damning clip, the one where Marcus laid out their plan to take everything from me, and emailed it to myself with the subject line, "To Rachel's parents." I didn't send it yet, but I wanted the draft ready. When the time came, I wanted her to know just how bad things were going to get. That evening, Rachel seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly. She was nervous. Good. I wanted her to feel the walls closing in. By the time we went to bed, I could see the tension in her shoulders. She was unraveling, and I hadn't even confronted her yet. Soon, though, very soon. The next morning, Rachel was up early, dressed sharper than usual for a Saturday. She claimed she was meeting a friend for brunch, but I already knew better. The nervous energy radiating off her told me everything I needed to know. She was meeting Marcus. As soon as she left, I grabbed the burner phone and typed a quick message to Marcus from Rachel's account. "Let's meet at the usual place. We need to talk about what's next." I hit send and waited. Sure enough, within minutes, Marcus replied, "Be there in 30. Perfect. I followed Rachel's car, staying just far enough behind to avoid suspicion. She didn't head toward any restaurant. Instead, she drove to the same boutique hotel I'd seen in her credit card statements weeks ago. My blood boiled as I parked down the street and watched her meet Marcus at the entrance. They didn't even try to hide it. Rachel leaned in and kissed him before they walked inside together. I waited for 5 minutes, letting my anger simmer before stepping out of my car. In my hand was my phone, its camera ready. Inside the lobby, I asked the receptionist for directions to the bar, pretending to look for a colleague. The place was small, quiet, and full of cozy corners perfect for clandestine meetings. I didn't have to look long. There they were, sitting close together, their heads bent as they whispered. Rachel was smiling, her hand resting on Marcus's arm like nothing was wrong in the world. It made me sick, but I forced myself to stay calm. I lifted my phone and snapped a few photos, making sure to capture their faces and body language. Then I left unnoticed. By the time I got home, I had already sent the photos to my lawyer, along with a message. "Add these to the file." Tom replied within minutes. "This is gold. They won't know what hit them." With everything in place, I decided it was time to tighten the noose. I pulled out the burner phone again and sent another message to Marcus from Rachel's account. "We need to come clean. He's going to figure it out eventually." Marcus's reply was almost immediate. "No way. Stick to the plan. We're too close to stop now." That night, Rachel came home acting like everything was fine. She kissed me on the cheek and asked if I wanted to order takeout. "Sure," I said, keeping my tone light. "How was brunch?" She hesitated for half a second before replying. "Oh, it was great. Lisa and I had so much to catch up on." "Lisa, huh?" I made a mental note to casually mention Lisa the next time I saw her. Rachel didn't realize her house of cards was about to collapse. After dinner, she went to bed early again, claiming she wasn't feeling well. I knew better. She was avoiding me, probably texting Marcus, trying to calm him down after my fake messages had rattled him. Once she was asleep, I went back to work. I drafted an email containing everything. The photos from the hotel, the messages, the financial evidence, and the video footage. The subject line read, "For Rachel's eyes only." But I didn't send it yet. Timing was everything. I wanted to be face-to-face when she saw it. I wanted to see the look on her face when she realized the game was over. The next morning, I made Rachel's favorite breakfast, pancakes with blueberries and whipped cream. She looked surprised but didn't question it, probably thinking I was just being thoughtful. "I was thinking we could spend some time together today," I said as we ate. "Maybe go for a walk in the park? It's been a while." She hesitated, glancing at her phone. "Actually, I've got a few errands to run later." Of course she did. "Well, maybe later this afternoon, then," I said with a smile. She nodded, looking relieved. I could have confronted her right then, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. The moment had to be perfect, and I was going to make sure she never forgot ITWY mid-afternoon. Rachel had left the house again, no doubt meeting Marcus to discuss their next steps. I wasn't worried. Let them think they still had control. Every move they made was feeding into my plan. I spent the next few hours preparing for what was coming. I printed copies of the most incriminating evidence, the photos, financial documents, and of course, screenshots of their messages. Each piece of paper felt heavier than the last, a tangible reminder of how thoroughly they had betrayed me. Then I placed everything into a folder and left it on the coffee table in the living room. This wasn't just about catching her off guard anymore. It was about ensuring she couldn't talk her way out of it. Around 6 o'clock, Rachel came home. She walked in, humming softly, looking far too content for someone whose life was about to implode. "Hey," she said, setting her purse down. "What's for dinner?" I stayed seated on the couch, staring at the TV, but not really watching. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. Rachel froze. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone careful. "Sit down," I said, nodding toward the couch across from me. She hesitated, but eventually, she sat, folding her hands in her lap. "You're scaring me," she said with a nervous laugh. I didn't laugh back. Instead, I picked up the folder and slid it across the coffee table toward her. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing it like it might bite her. "Go ahead," I said. "Take a look." She opened the folder and began flipping through the pages. At first, her expression was blank, but as she read further, her face turned pale. What is this?" she stammered, her voice shaking. "It's everything," I said, leaning forward. "Your affair. The money Marcus stole. The plans you two made to leave me with nothing. It's all there, Rachel. No more lies. No more excuses." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. I can explain," she said, her voice breaking. I laughed bitterly. "Oh, please do. I'd love to hear how sneaking around with my business partner and stealing from me is somehow justifiable." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered. "Marcus said." "Stop," I snapped, cutting her off. "I don't care what Marcus said. I care about the fact that you betrayed me, Rachel. You betrayed our marriage, our family, everything we built together." She started sobbing, covering her face with her hands. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I made a mistake. Please, we can fix this." "Fix this?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You think this is something we can fix? You destroyed my trust, Rachel. You destroyed us." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Please," she begged. "I'll end it with Marcus. I'll do whatever it takes." I shook my head. "It's too late for that. You've already done enough." I stood up, grabbing my car keys. "You have until tomorrow to pack your things and leave," I said, my voice cold and final. "And don't think for a second I won't follow through with this. I've already sent copies of everything to my lawyer." Rachel's sobs grew louder as I walked to the door. "Where are you going?" she cried. "To get some air," I said without turning around. And with that, I left her sitting there, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal. As I drove aimlessly through the city, the weight of what I'd just done started to sink in. The anger that had fueled me for weeks was beginning to wane, replaced by a hollow ache in my chest. I'd won, sure, but at what cost? The truth was I wasn't just angry at Rachel. I was devastated. I'd loved her once, deeply and completely. And now, that love was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite define. I pulled into an empty parking lot and sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. I thought about our daughter, about what all of this would mean for her. She was too young to understand, but one day, she'd ask questions. And what would I tell her? That her mother threw everything away for some sleazy affair? No, I couldn't let this destroy her too. As much as I wanted to stay in that parking lot forever, I knew I had to go back. There was still more to be done, more to say. But for now, I just needed a moment to breathe. When I got back home, the house was quiet. Rachel had locked herself in the bedroom, probably too ashamed or too scared to face me. That was fine. I wasn't ready to deal with her yet. Instead, I turned my attention to the next target, Marcus. The board at our company was already reviewing the evidence Tom had provided. His suspension had turned into a full-blown investigation, but I wanted to be sure he felt the personal consequences just as much as the professional ones. After all, Marcus hadn't just stolen from the business. He'd stolen from me. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. I walked through the familiar halls, nodding at colleagues who were already buzzing about Marcus's scandal. I could hear whispers as I passed. Can you believe it? Marcus? Of all people. He seemed so polished. Guess you never really know someone. By the time I reached my desk, I could barely contain my satisfaction. It wasn't enough for Marcus to be exposed. I wanted to see him squirm. At noon, I got the call I'd been waiting for. It was Tom. You're going to want to come down here, he said. Why? I asked, though I could already guess. Marcus showed up at the office. Tom replied, his tone laced with amusement. He's demanding a meeting with the board. Says this is all a misunderstanding. I laughed. Oh, this should be good. When I arrived at the boardroom, Marcus was already there, pacing like a caged animal. He looked disheveled, his tie askew, his usually slicked-back hair a mess. Ah, here he is, Marcus said when he saw me, pointing an accusatory finger. You did this. You set me up. I didn't even flinch. Set you up? Marcus, you're the one who embezzled company funds. You're the one who violated the trust of every single person in this room. Don't blame me because you got caught. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one came to Marcus's defense. You think you're so clever, Marcus spat. But you're not untouchable either. You have skeletons too, and I'll. Enough. One of the board members interrupted, her voice firm. She turned to Marcus, her expression icy. We've reviewed the evidence. There's no question about what you've done. Your suspension is now a termination, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Marcus's face crumpled. You can't do this, he shouted. This is my company, too. The board member raised an eyebrow. Not anymore. I didn't say anything as security arrived and led Marcus out of the room. He shot me a murderous glare as he passed, but I met his gaze without blinking. Later that day, I sent Marcus a message from the burner phone I'd been using to impersonate Rachel. It's over. Don't contact me again. I pictured him reading it, alone in whatever hole he'd crawled into. If he thought Rachel was cutting him off, he'd be even more desperate and more isolated. I didn't stop there. That evening, I sent the evidence of his affair to his wife, Jessica. I kept it simple. You deserve to know the truth. Attached is everything. I didn't wait for a reply. Jessica was a strong woman. She'd handle it however she saw fit. But one thing was certain. Marcus was about to lose everything. Back at home, Rachel was still in damage control mode. She tried talking to me after our daughter went to bed, her voice trembling as she pleaded for forgiveness. I'll go to therapy, she said. I'll do anything. Just don't give up on us. I stared at her, the woman I once loved, and felt nothing. I gave you everything, Rachel, I said quietly, and you threw it all away. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. She started crying again, but I turned and walked away, leaving her to drown in her guilt. The house felt heavy that night, like the air itself was weighed down by all the lies and betrayal. But for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. Marcus was gone. Rachel's facade was crumbling. The pieces were finally falling into place. The following morning, Rachel tiptoed around the house like a ghost. She avoided eye contact, her face puffy and pale. The tension was suffocating, but I didn't offer her any reprieve. Every time she opened her mouth to speak, I would simply walk away. I wasn't in the mood for apologies or excuses. I knew it was time to deliver the final blow. While she was out running errands, or more likely, desperately trying to salvage her shattered connection with Marcus, I put the last piece of my plan into motion. I pulled up the email draft I had prepared earlier, the one labeled for Rachel's eyes only. This time, I sent it. Rachel came home around midday. I was in the living room, scrolling through my phone, when I heard the sound of her phone buzzing repeatedly in her purse. She pulled it out, and her face froze. "What's this?" she asked, her voice high-pitched and shaky. I shrugged, still pretending to look at my phone. "Why don't you tell me?" Her fingers trembled as she tapped the screen, opening the email. I watched out of the corner of my eye as she scrolled through the photos, the screenshots, and finally, the video of her and Marcus. Her face turned ashen. This isn't fair," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "You were never supposed to see this." I stood up, unable to contain my anger anymore. Oh, I wasn't supposed to see it? That's your defense? You thought you could sneak around with Marcus, rob me blind, and I'd just stay in the dark forever? Rachel's tears spilled over. It wasn't like that. Marcus, Don't. I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you dare try to pin this on him. You made your choices, Rachel. And now, you're going to face the consequences. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. I don't know what to do, she cried. Please, just give me a chance to fix this. I shook my head. There's nothing left to fix. I've already filed for divorce. Her head shot up, her expression one of pure desperation. You didn't, she whispered. I did, I said coldly. And you'll be hearing from my lawyer soon. But that's not all. She blinked at me, fear etched into her features. I sent everything to your parents, I continued. They deserve to know the truth. And don't even think about playing the victim when they call, Rachel. They've seen the proof. She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. You sent it to them? I nodded. And to Marcus's wife. I'm sure she'll be thrilled to know what you two were up to. Rachel stared at me, her face a mix of anger, betrayal, and despair. You're ruining my life, she said through gritted teeth. No, Rachel, iraplia. You ruined your own life. I'm just making sure everyone knows it. That evening, I left the house, needing space from the chaos. When I returned, Rachel was sitting on the front steps, clutching her phone. She looked up as I approached, her eyes red and swollen. They're all calling me, she said quietly. My parents, Marcus, even Jessica. Good, I said, walking past her. Please, she said, her voice breaking. Don't do this. Don't take everything from me. I stopped in the doorway and turned to face her. You should have thought about that before you stepped into my bed with Marcus, I said coldly. By the time I went to bed, Rachel was still on the steps, her phone lighting up with calls and messages she didn't have the courage to answer. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace. She had tried to destroy me. Instead, I had destroyed her. The next morning, I woke up to an unexpected message on my phone. It was from Jessica, Marcus's wife. Jessica, can we talk? I think we can help each other. I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of what to expect. Jessica and I had never been close. We'd exchanged pleasantries at company events and the occasional barbecue, but that was it. Still, considering the circumstances, I wasn't about to ignore her. I replied, let's meet. Where and when? An hour later, I found myself sitting across from Jessica at a quiet cafe. She looked composed, but the fury in her eyes was unmistakable. She wasted no time getting to the point. I got your email, she said, her voice tight. And I've spent the last 12 hours piecing together just how much of a fool Marcus has made of me. But I'm not going to sit back and let him get away with it. And neither should you. Her bluntness caught me off guard. I've already started the process, I said. Marcus is out of the company, and Rachel and I are getting divorced. What more is there to do? Jessica leaned forward, her expression fierce. I'm not talking about the company or your divorce. I'm talking about making them pay. Really pay. They thought they could betray us, humiliate us, and walk away without consequences. I'm not letting that happen. Are you? I took a sip of my coffee, considering her words. What exactly are you proposing? She smirked, pulling a folder out of her bag. I've been married to Marcus long enough to know where all the skeletons are buried. And let me tell you, there are a lot of skeletons. Jessica slid the folder across the table. Inside were copies of documents, emails, and bank statements that painted a damning picture of Marcus's shady dealings, not just at our company, but elsewhere. Fraud, tax evasion, even hush money payments. He always thought I was too dumb to notice, Jessica said bitterly. But I've been keeping records for years, just in case. I looked through the folder, my mind racing. If we used this, Marcus wouldn't just lose his career. He could end up behind bars. What do you want me to do with this? I asked, my voice low. Jessica's smirk widened. You're the one with the connections. Send it to whoever you need to. I'll back you up if it comes to that. But Marcus? He's not walking away from this unscathed. Not if I have anything to say about it. Later that day, I forwarded Jessica's files to Tom. His response was immediate. This is gold. I'll make sure the right people see it. I didn't stop there. Using the burner phone, I sent Marcus a final message, pretending to be Rachel. Jessica knows everything. She's not staying quiet. You need to run damage control. Marcus's reply came almost instantly. What the hell are you talking about? Call me now. I didn't reply. Let him sweat. By evening, the fallout had begun. Jessica had gone public with her findings, filing a formal complaint against Marcus with the authorities. News of his wrongdoings spread like wildfire, and by the end of the day, Marcus's name was plastered across every business news site in the region. Rachel, too, was caught in the crossfire. People knew about the affair, thanks to Jessica's pointed remarks in her statements to the press. It wasn't long before Rachel's social media was flooded with comments from people who had no qualms about voicing their disgust. When I got home, Rachel was sitting at the dining table, staring at her phone in horror. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I dropped my keys on the counter and leaned against the doorway. "I didn't do anything," I said calmly. "Jessica handled that all on her own." Rachel's head snapped up, her eyes blazing with anger. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" I didn't even try to deny it. "I didn't start this, Rachel. You and Marcus did. You made your choices, and now you're dealing with the consequences." She stood up, her hands clenched into fists. "You're destroying me. You're destroying our family." "Our family," I said, my voice rising. "You destroyed our family the moment you decided to betray me. Don't you dare try to shift the blame." Rachel opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Instead, she sat back down, burying her face in her hands. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. I stared at her, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, hurt, and exhaustion. "I want you gone," I said finally. By the end of the week, as I sat on the couch later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. "Marcus is finished. Thank you for your help." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The following days were a whirlwind of chaos and fallout. Marcus's public disgrace was complete, and Rachel was crumbling under the pressure. Every time I saw her, she looked more hollowed out, her phone constantly buzzing with calls and messages she couldn't bring herself to answer. I watched her unravel from a distance, maintaining just enough civility to avoid any major confrontations. But her desperation was growing, and I could see it in the way she hovered near me, trying to gauge whether there was any chance of redemption. On Thursday morning, as I was sipping coffee and going over some work emails, Rachel sat across from me at the kitchen table. For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression unreadable. "I know I've ruined everything," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't look up from my laptop. "You're not wrong." She flinched but pressed on. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. But can we at least talk? For the sake of our daughter." Her mention of our daughter made me pause. I closed my laptop and looked at her, my expression hard. "What's there to talk about, Rachel? You made your choices. Now you're dealing with the consequences. How does that involve our daughter?" Rachel's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she might break down completely. But she held herself together, barely. "I don't want her to hate me," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't want her to grow up thinking her mother is a monster." "She's 2 years old," I said coldly. "She doesn't understand any of this. But one day, she will. And when that day comes, you'll have to answer for your actions, not me." Rachel looked down, tears spilling onto her cheeks. I don't know what to do," she whispered. I stood up, grabbing my mug and heading toward the sink. "You can start by packing your things. Your time here is almost up." Later that afternoon, Rachel made her last-ditch effort. I was working in my home office when I heard a soft knock on the door. I didn't bother looking up. "What is it?" I asked, my tone clipped. She stepped into the room, holding a piece of paper in her trembling hands. "I drafted a letter," she said, "to the board, admitting everything, the affair, the financial scheme, all of it. That got my attention." I set down my pen and leaned back in my chair. "And why are you telling me this?" Rachel took a deep breath. "If I send this, maybe they'll focus on Marcus instead of dragging you into this mess." I narrowed my eyes at her. "You think I care about their focus, Rachel? I'm not the one who's been lying, cheating, and stealing." She nodded, her tears starting again. "I know, but I just want to do one thing right. For once. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to decide if this was genuine or just another attempt to manipulate me. Fine, I said finally. Send it. But don't expect me to pat you on the back for doing the bare minimum. Rachel nodded and left the room without another word. That evening, I got a call from Tom. Rachel just sent a confession to the board, he said, his tone surprised. It's detailed, incriminating, and completely damning for her and Marcus. I let out a bitter laugh. Guess she's finally realizing how deep the hole she's dug really is. Maybe, Tom replied. But this helps us. With her admission on record, the divorce proceedings will be a lot smoother. She won't have much of a leg to stand on in court. Good, I said. Let's keep the pressure on. When I got home later that night, Rachel was sitting on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes hollow. I sent it, she said quietly. I know, I replied. She nodded, looking down at her hands. What happens now? Now, I said, my voice cold. Now you live with the consequences of your actions. Just like Marcus. Friday morning was eerily quiet. The kind of silence that feels unnatural, like the world is holding its breath. I got up, made my coffee, and went about my routine as if it were any other day. But I knew the storm wasn't over. Not yet. Rachel didn't come out of the bedroom until mid-morning. She looked exhausted, her eyes puffy and red. It was as if the weight of everything she'd done had finally caught up to her. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Morning, she muttered, avoiding my eyes as she poured herself a cup of coffee. Morning, I replied, my tone neutral. She sat down across from me, her hands wrapped around her mug, as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. I got a call from my parents, she said quietly. I didn't respond, letting her continue. They know everything, she admitted, her voice trembling. They said they're disappointed in me, that they can't believe I would do something like this. I sipped my coffee, my expression unreadable. Well, they're not wrong. Rachel flinched, her tears starting to fall again. I didn't mean for things to get so out of control, she said, her voice cracking. I was stupid and selfish, and I didn't think about the consequences. Consequences you're only regretting now that they're slapping you in the face, I said, setting my mug down. She looked up at me, her tears spilling over. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said, her voice shaking. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. Do you even know what you're sorry for, Rachel? Are you sorry you hurt me? Or are you just sorry you got caught? Her lip quivered, and she didn't answer right away. Both, she whispered eventually. I shook my head. That's not good enough. As the day wore on, Rachel's desperation became more apparent. She called her parents again, trying to explain herself. But from what I overheard, the conversation didn't go well. By the time she hung up, she was a mess, pacing the living room and muttering to herself. I stayed out of her way, working in my office and letting her spiral. Every so often, I'd hear her phone buzz with incoming messages, probably from Marcus or Jessica, but she ignored them all. Late that afternoon, I walked into the kitchen to find her sitting at the table, staring blankly at her phone. Her hands were shaking. They're all gone, she said quietly. Who's gone? I asked, though I already had an idea. Everyone, she said, her voice hollow. My friends, my family, Marcus. They've all turned their backs on me. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorway. What did you expect, Rachel? You lied to everyone who cared about you. You betrayed the people who trusted you most. Did you think they'd just forgive you and move on? Her head snapped up, and for the first time in days, I saw a flash of anger in her eyes. I know I screwed up, okay? I don't need you to keep rubbing it in. I pushed off the doorway and walked toward her, my expression hard. You think this is about me rubbing it in? No, Rachel. This is about you finally facing the consequences of your actions. You want people to forgive you? Start by taking responsibility for what you've done. She stared at me, her anger dissolving into despair. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. You can't, I said bluntly. You don't get to undo this, Rachel. All you can do now is accept it and try to do better with whatever's left of your life. That night, Rachel packed her things. It wasn't much, just a few bags of clothes and personal items. She didn't ask where she was supposed to go, and I didn't offer any suggestions. As she stood by the door, ready to leave, she turned to me one last time. "I know you'll never forgive me," she said softly, "but I hope one day you'll find peace." I didn't reply. I simply opened the door and waited for her to walk through it. As the door clicked shut behind her, I let out a long breath, the weight of the past few weeks finally starting to lift. Rachel was gone. Marcus was finished. And I had survived. But it wasn't over yet. There was still one more piece of unfinished business. With Rachel gone, the house felt emptier than I expected. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, like the aftermath of a storm that had torn everything apart. But I couldn't dwell on it. There was one last person I needed to deal with. Marcus. By now, Marcus's reputation was in shambles, his career destroyed, and his marriage in tatters. But I wasn't satisfied. He had been the architect of this mess, the one who had wormed his way into my life and torn it apart from the inside. And I wasn't about to let him walk away without feeling the full force of what he'd done. I called him, using my regular number this time. He answered on the second ring, his voice cold and wary. "What do you want?" he asked. "Meet me," I said, keeping my tone calm but firm. "Same park where we used to take the kids. 30 minutes. Marcus hesitated. "Why the hell would I do that?" "Because if you don't," I said, "I'll make sure what's left of your pathetic life gets even worse." There was a pause. Then he sighed. "Fine. 30 minutes. I arrived at the park early, sitting on a bench near the playground where our kids used to play together. It felt surreal, thinking back to those days when I considered Marcus my closest friend. How naive I'd been. Marcus showed up a few minutes later, his hands stuffed into his coat pockets. He looked rough, dark circles under his eyes, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous tension. "This better be quick," he said, stopping a few feet away from me. "Oh, it will be," I replied, standing up and closing the distance between us. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. "You destroyed my family," I said finally, my voice low and steady. Marcus scoffed. "Don't pin this all on me. Rachel was a willing participant, in case you forgot." I stepped closer, my fists clenched. "Oh, I haven't forgotten. But you were supposed to be my friend. You didn't just betray me, Marcus. You went after my family, my business, my entire life. And for what? A cheap thrill?" Marcus looked away, his jaw tightening. "I didn't plan for it to go this far," he muttered. "That's your excuse?" I snapped. "You didn't plan for it to go this far? You planned to ruin me, Marcus. You and Rachel plotted to take everything from me. Don't pretend you're innocent." His eyes darted back to mine, and for a moment, I thought he might try to argue. But instead, he just sighed. "Fine," he said. "You're right. I screwed up. I let things get out of control. But what do you want from me? I've lost everything already." I stared at him, my anger boiling over. "I want you to feel what I felt. To live every day knowing you destroyed your own life. And I want you to stay the hell away from me and my daughter. Forever." Marcus nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. "You don't have to worry about that," he said. "I'm leaving town. There's nothing left for me here." "Good," I said coldly. "Don't come back." I turned and walked away without waiting for a response. As I drove home, a strange sense of finality settled over me. Marcus was out of my life. Rachel was gone. The pieces of my old life were scattered, but at least the toxic ones had been removed. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. That night, I tucked my daughter into bed, sitting by her side as she drifted off to sleep. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the pain, the destruction. And yet, here she was, my reason to keep going, my anchor through the storm. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "It's just us now, kiddo, but we're going to be okay." As I turned off the light and closed her door, I felt a small spark of hope. The worst was over. Now it was time to rebuild. The morning after my final confrontation with Marcus, I woke up to an unfamiliar sense of clarity. For weeks, my life had been consumed by anger and betrayal, every moment dictated by the need for justice or revenge. Now, with Rachel and Marcus out of the picture, the chaos had finally settled. All that was left was the quiet, bittersweet aftermath. I spent that day focused on my daughter. We went to the park, just the two of us, and played on the swings until our laughter drowned out the weight of everything that had happened. Watching her smile, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. That evening, after putting her to bed, I sat down with a notebook and started making a list. 1. Find a therapist. I needed to process everything, not just the betrayal, but the pieces of myself I'd lost along the way. If I was going to move forward, I had to start by confronting my own emotions. 2. Protect the business. Marcus was gone, but the damage he'd done could take months, maybe years, to fully repair. I needed to double down on my efforts to rebuild the trust of my employees and clients. 3. Rebuild my life. This wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. For myself. For my daughter. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into that list. I started therapy, where I learned to unpack the tangled mess of anger, sadness, and guilt that had been weighing me down. My therapist, a calm and empathetic woman named Karen, didn't let me off the hook either. She pushed me to reflect on my role in the breakdown of my marriage, not to excuse Rachel's actions, but to understand how we'd reached that point. It's not about blaming yourself, Karen said during one session. It's about taking ownership of your healing. You can't control what Rachel did, but you can control how you move forward. At the office, I made it a point to be more present. I held team meetings, answered questions, and reassured everyone that despite the upheaval, the company was stable. Slowly, the trust began to rebuild. Jessica's files had been the final nail in Marcus's coffin. Word spread quickly in professional circles about his downfall, and no one was willing to touch him with a 10-foot pole. As for Rachel, I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was staying with a friend, trying to pick up the pieces of her life. I didn't think about her much anymore. One Friday evening, a few months after Rachel left, I found myself sitting on the back porch with a beer in hand, watching the sunset. My daughter was inside, watching a movie, her laughter echoing through the house. I thought about how much had changed. My life was nothing like I'd imagined it would be a year ago. But in some strange way, I felt lighter. The betrayal had broken me, yes, but it hadn't destroyed me. If anything, it had taught me what I was capable of, how to protect what mattered, how to rebuild from the rubble, and how to choose myself when no one else would. As the sky turned shades of orange and pink, I raised my beer in a quiet toast. To survival, to resilience, to starting over. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled.